So what I'm going to talk about is the topic of cookies, local storage, and session storage. And the idea of cookies is you've probably seen something like this. You log into a website, and the website might have a window pop up that says, would you like me to remember your password? Right? Or would you like me to remember your username? And the idea is that if you come back to this website again, you don't have to type it in again because you said, yeah, remember it. So have you seen these lately? They might not say, would you like me to remember your username and password? It might ask a different question, like, is this a public computer or a private computer? Mm-hmm. Right, and the reason why they kind of ask that now is a lot of people just, from habit would say, yeah, remember my password. You're in an airport, you log into a website, yeah, remember it, so that way I don't have to type it in again. But you don't want people sitting down at that website and then bringing up your bank information and then your password's filled in. So they switched it to, is this a public computer or a private computer? So you might want to say this if it's like a computer in your house that no one else is going to use. And then for your convenience, it could remember your user ID or your password. So when you come back to the website, you don't have to type it in again. So the question is, how does this stuff get saved? So if you go to, let's say, Facebook, and you log in and you want to leave your email and password in that browser, if you then shut the computer down and unplug it and then come back, where did your password and email get saved? So, cookies are data that's stored in small text files on your computer. And when a web browser, when a web server wants to has to send a web page to a browser and the connection is shut down, the server has no information about that user. So the solution to the problem is to create what they called cookies. Sometimes it's like a tray of cookies. They used that expression many years ago. And so when you go to visit a page, you can store information, the server can store information needed for your using the website in cookies. So cookies can be set, they're always a pair, so it's basically a field is equal to a value. So we could say like the email field is equal to student ID at college.edu. And we'd remember this pair. So all the cookies really are is a set of pairs, fields and values. And then every time the browser requests a page from the web server, it will send the cookies for that server to the server so the server can evaluate them. So for example, if you log into a web page and the server checks your password and says, okay, yeah, this is a valid user, now you're going to go back and forth, sending messages back and forth. You don't want to have to keep logging in again every time you want a new page. They're going to record that you are logged in into a cookie. Okay. So in JavaScript, how can we create a cookie? Okay, so we go to the document. There is a field called cookie, and we can add a string to it. So we can say email equals and then type out your email address. So now if that same browser, Chrome will have its own set of cookies from Internet Explorer. If that same browser connects to that same web server, and there's a field called email, we could fill it in with the data that's set in the cookie. So then you might say, all right, if I set a cookie, how long does it last? Well, it'll last forever if you just say email equals a student ID. Now you can come along and change email to a different value, and then this will be gone and the new value will be updated. But if you want it to eventually go away at some point, you would have to have it expire. So you could say the document.cookie equals email the student ID and the whole email address, and then you could say it expires, and you have to give UTC time. Give it in UTC time, and then the cookie will go away at that time. Otherwise, the cookie remains valid. And it could also be, because from your websites, there's many pages in a website, and there are paths within a website. You could say, this cookie is valid, and give all the paths of which they're valid. So as you bounce around from page to page, the page could have JavaScript code in it that goes and reads this field and takes the person's name and then does whatever it needs to do, fill in pages, fill in forms, or whatever you want to use it for. Okay, so if I wanted to get a value from a cookie, I could have a variable called cookie tray, set that equal to all the cookies for that browser, and then the document cookie will return all the cookies in one string, something like this. Cookie 1 equals value 1, cookie 2 equals value 2, cookie 3 equals value 3. So it looks very much like a string, and the string has pairs, so the question is it a string? And it's not really a string, but you could visualize it like a string. But the document cookie property looks like normal text string, but it is not. Even if you write the whole cookie string, if you write a whole cookie string to the document cookie, when you go to read it again, you will only see the new value pair that you added to it. So for example, if we had email equals some student, and then you later said now cookie, document cookie equals password, password's Hello Kitty, you might think you blew away this part of the string, but you didn't. It actually just added it onto the end. So it doesn't act exactly like a string, but it ends up being saved like a string. So now, so for example, if you said document cookie equals this, and then later said document cookie equals this, it actually concatenated it onto the end. So now it would look like the email address is this and the password is this. Okay. And then expired cookies get deleted. Non-expired ones sit around forever. So if you want to get rid of one, you have to put an expiration on it for cookies. Okay. So suppose we wanted to have a function that sets the value of a cookie for a visitor. A visitor comes to your website and we want to set the value of their cookie. So we could have a function, we would write it, function set cookie. We pass in a name, a value, and a possible expiration. Okay, so we've done this before. We have a variable of type date. We make a variable d. It's a date object. We set the time of the variable to be whatever the current time is. Now in this case, we're having the cookie expire so many days from now. You could do it hours and minutes if you wanted to, but if we wanted to do days from now, we would take how many days they passed in as a parameter. So for example, this could be, we're setting the email address to whatever your particular email address is, and we're going to leave that in effect for 5 days. So we take the number of days, multiply that by 24 times 60 times 60, 24 hours in a day, minutes and seconds, and then actually it gets recorded in milliseconds, so we'd have to multiply this by 1,000 to get milliseconds. So we're taking the current time plus however many milliseconds it is for the number of days that you want this to stay around. So now we're going to build a string called expires, and we're going to say expires equals, and we're going to take the value of the date and convert it to a UTC string, universal time string. Then we write document cookie. Now remember, if there are already other cookies in this cookie, we're just concatenating to the end, or updating an existing one. We're not blowing away the cookies from before. So we'd say the cookie name, so now we're doing string operations. Cookie name plus the equal sign, plus the value, semicolon, plus expires, and then when it expires, and then the path that it expires. So this could be a function you would have in your JavaScript, in all of your web pages, and then you could just call it if you want to set a cookie value. If you decide you want to get a cookie value, it's a little clumsy, but the function, we could write a function called getCookie. So let's say I want to know the person's email address. So I pass in the cookie name, the field I want the value of, and I'd say I have a variable and cookie name plus equal sign. I could decode the cookie going into the document. This would handle special characters, so this is a function JavaScript gives you in case the cookie has ampersands and dollar signs and stuff like that to it. So now we're going to end up getting the whole tray of cookies. And there's another function that will split them based on semicolons. So that breaks them up into an array of individual cookies rather than one big cookie string. And then with a for loop, we can go through all of the cookies looking for the field we're interested in, which is the parameter that was passed in. So we go through it until we find a match, and then when we find a match, we can either return the value of the cookie we're looking for, or we could return nothing, which basically means we can't find the cookie. So you can go looking for the cookie, and it may come back empty, or it may come back with the cookie that you're looking for. And then if you find it, you can fill in the string. Okay, so the function check cookie, okay, so let's say we want to check to see if the cookie is set. We can have a function called check cookie. We have a variable email equals, and then we get the email cookie. So this function is calling the function we just did on the previous screen. Okay, so now it may come back with a value, and it may not, depending on if it was in the cookie tray. So if the email is not blank, meaning we found one in the cookie tray, then we could print out a message and have a pop-up window. You have been to the site before, and then print out the person's username. Okay, otherwise, we could prompt them to say, please enter your email address, and then, and then we could add them to our system, and we could have it expire 1 year from now. Okay. So deleting it, how do you delete a cookie? You don't delete them, unfortunately, you have to expire them. So we can have a function called delete cookie, and then we can pass in a parameter, the name. So let's say it's the email address we'd like to get rid of. And what we can do is we can say document cookie equals. Now, if the cookie already exists, let's say the email cookie already exists, we're now writing on top of it. Right? We're not deleting any already existing cookies. If it already exists and we go to set it using cookie, then it'll find the one that's in the tray and replace it with the data we're putting in. So now all we're doing is saying the cookie plus the equal sign, and then we are adding expires, and we're picking a time that's in the past. So if we're going to pick a time that's in the past, then it's already expired and it'll go away. Okay, now just out of curiosity, where are cookies stored? So cookies are stored on your computer by the website you visited. Some browsers, cookies are stored in a small file. Depending on the browser, it could be a little bit different. Firefox, all the cookies are stored in a single file, but they could also be stored in a bunch of little files individually. It's really the choice of the browsers. Okay. All right. So, cookies have been around for a while, probably the late 1990s, and then in 2014, HTML5 came out. And so when HTML5 came out, there were so many interesting, probably the most interesting features. Many things came out in HTML5, but geolocation, drag and drop. So if you want to drag a file, if you want to upload a file, rather than hitting a search button and then you have to search for it on your computer and then hit an upload button, you can now just drag and drop a file. So that was a new piece. And this is what's kind of, not a replacement, but an improvement on the concept of cookies, what they call HTML local storage. It's also application caches, so if you go to a website and the website has pictures in it, you would go out to the server and get the HTML page. The HTML page calls for pictures. You go get a copy of the picture. Pictures take a long time to transmit, much longer than HTML files. So if your browser then happens to want to post that same picture again, does it make sense to go out to the server and get another copy of it? Or do you already have a copy and just display the copy you have? This saves on traffic back and forth to the server. But what's the downside to saving a copy of a picture by its name and then saying, oh, I already have a copy, why go get a fresh one? So any downside to caching pictures or content PDF files on a server?
Load time.
What's that?
Maybe load time?
Well, you're saving on load time. That's really why they have the cache. The downside is, what if it's been updated since the last time you got a copy? So I don't know if you've ever gone to a website where you have it shows a picture, then the server changes it to a new picture, and you keep showing the old picture. Chrome does this a lot. So you're like, you keep saying reload it, I want the new one, but it's saying, well, I already got a cache copy. I'm trying to save time. Okay. And then another interesting thing was server-side events. We'll talk a little bit about that at the end of this talk, but because it kind of overlaps with our local storage. So cookies, like I say, have been around probably since 96 to 2014. So they've been around 18 years. And then in HTML5, they came up with some kind of new improvements to it. So some of the things that HTML5 got rid of and found a new way to do things, or simply got rid of them, are some interesting ones are in this list. So applets seem to be gone now. They're using objects. A number of things have been improved in CSS that no longer exist, like centering text on a file. In CSS, font is, if you want to change how big print is or what color print is, rather than putting it in a font tag, saying font and then BG color equals and set the background color, you could just add it in CSS. Frames and frame sets seem to be gone now. And so, yeah, so anyway, so HTML5, a little bit of an overhaul on how web browsers display HTML pages. So they introduced web storage. Web applications can store locally within your browser. So you might think, well, that sounds like cookies. So before HTML5, application data had to be stored in cookies. And the cookie had to be sent back and forth to the server every time a page was requested, just in case the server needed it. Well, a lot of times the server doesn't need it. So that's a lot more traffic and data going back and forth. Okay. So they came up with the idea of local storage, which they almost maybe should have called client storage, but calling it local storage, meaning it's on your machine, it's not on the server. And unlike storage, unlike cookies, the storage limit is far larger. It's around 5 megabytes of storage, as opposed to cookies, which I think have a cap of like 4K. So the cookies are not that big. They were big when they first came out, but then as time went on, they're not big enough now. So this new, what I like to call client storage, but really they call it local storage, has a lot more space. You dedicate a lot more space on your hard drive to save the data in. Okay, and then, okay. Yeah, so, so if you want to storing into local storage, a set of methods have come along. So we now have local storage dot set item, method that comes with us. Same thing as cookies, we're storing in pairs. So we could say we have a field called the last name, and then we store your last name into get associated with that field. If you want to retrieve the storage, we have a retrieve method called getItem. So I could say the variable last name equals go to my local storage, call the getItem method, and ask for this field, the last name. So in this case, Smith would come back. Then in my document, I could say my welcome message, if I have, a paragraph called welcome message. And I could say welcome, whatever the person's last name is. So it probably wasn't a good idea for me to use the variable name from the cookie and the same name here. But this would say welcome Smith, and this is the field associated with the name Smith. Okay. So local storage, does it have the idea of storing and expiring and deleting? So the local storage property allows you to save key value pairs. Right, we already covered that. Local storage objects store data, have no expiration dates. The data will not be deleted when the browser is closed. You close the browser, shut off the computer, next day turn the computer back on, it'll still be there. And the local storage is read-only. So someone else can come in and change the data. But they have a remove item. So you can actually just come in and delete it. So it's not one difference between cookies, is cookies you have to expire them, whereas here we can actually go in and delete. Okay, so just a couple of little differences between cookies, which have been around since the 90s, and local storage, which has been around since 2014. If you happen to be using a browser that's enabled for HTML5. So local storage, like I say, has 5, depends on the browser, 5 could be as high as 10 megabytes of storage, whereas cookies have 4K. There's no limit on the number of pairs you can put, whereas cookies were limited to 20 fields. Okay. When you're using cookies, if you have cookies set, and you send a web page back to a server, right? Let's say you log into Twitter, they send a page to you. You have cookies related to Twitter. Every time you send a message, if you click on something and you want Twitter to send you another page, you have to send your cookies to them. They could evaluate the cookies, considering sending a web page back to you, and then they'd send it to you. So cookies get sent with each web request. Local storage does not. And the cookies can be recorded on the server, the value of the cookies, as they're getting passed back and forth, whereas they're not being recorded with local storage. There's also the concept of session storage. So this is really effectively local storage, but as soon as you disconnect with the server, all the cookies automatically, I shouldn't call them cookies, all the storage automatically gets deleted. So a session is you, the client, logging into an application like WhatsApp, and as soon as you log out, your session is closed, all the data goes away. So the session storage, like local storage, property is allowed to save in key and value pair. Email equals this, password equals this, right? So it's always stored in pairs, and it's stored on the web browser. Session storage objects store data only for one session. The data is deleted when the web browser is closed. Or even if the tab is closed, it will get deleted too. So it works just like local storage, except it's tied directly to the session. Okay. So how do we get, set, move, clear session storage? Okay, so we could call the window.sessionStorage is where the tray of cookies is recorded for the session. We could say sessionStorage.setItem. Take this key, put in that value. Right, so pretty much methods have almost the same name as the local storage do. Variable last name, so if we wanted to read some storage, we could say the last name equals sessionStorage.getItem. Probably should have had instead of saying key, I probably should have said last name. I'll change that on the slides. Okay. The syntax for removing, you don't have to expire the if to expire the field, you can actually remove them. You can say sessionStorage.remove, give the field you want to remove. And if you want to remove them all at once, you could just say clear all of them out. And when you close the browser, the clear method will run, and then it will get cleared out. Okay, so here's some code where you might want to, an example of using sessions. So we could, suppose we wanted to, every time somebody's clicking on a page, we want to count up how many times they're clicking on the page. And then as soon as they disconnect from the web browser, we could get rid of it. So we could tell them, hey, we could have a running total on the bottom of the screen. So, sessionStorage.clickCount, if that value is set, then we could take, every time they do a click, we could take the number of clicks and add 1 to it and set that to the click count. If it hasn't been set, then we'll set it to 1. This will be like the first time they click something. So then we can send them a message that says, we could say the results stored in a field called results, stored in an element, like a paragraph called result. And then we could say you have clicked this button, and then we could go get the count, how many times they clicked it, and then you clicked it that many times this session. So as soon as they close the browser, it would go back to 0. Not like localStorage where it would pick up where it left off. So if you're comparing the three, right, so cookies, like I say, have been around since the 90s. SessionStorage, localStorage is new to HTML5, got introduced in 2014. And so localStorage, 5 to 10 megabytes depending on the browser. It's not session-based, so you need to actually go out and delete the fields manually. Just because you closed your browser doesn't mean the storage goes away. SessionStorage also 5 megabytes. It's session-based and working per window or per tab. So as you open up a new tab, you get a new set of session variables. As soon as the tab is closed, they go away. It's client-side reading only. So is localStorage, client-side reading only. So cookies expire depending on the setting and working of the window or the tab. Cookies are passed between the client and the server, and are supported pretty much on all web browsers. Whereas localStorage and sessionStorage are only supported on newer browsers supporting HTML5. Then if you wanted to clear them without programming, if you're the client and the server is sending out JavaScript code that's updating cookies, and you don't want these fields, you could go into your settings for your browser, and sometimes there'll be checkboxes that'll say, like, would you like to delete the cookies and other site data? So this other site data is really the session storage and the local storage. You could also clear out your cached images in case an image that you're getting from a website has changed and you happen to have a cached version and you'd like to get the freshest picture. So you could do that. Sometimes it depends on the box you're going to too. You go to Chrome and you want to delete your cookies. They actually list out your cookies, all of your cookies, and then cookies on a per website basis, and you could just hit the garbage can if you wanted to get rid of the sessions. The session cookies or the local cookies. Okay, so, all right, so this might sound like a different topic, but it's not really a different topic. One thing else introduced in HTML5 back in 2014 are server-sent events, SSE. So suppose you have a web page that has data on it, like the current score to a basketball game. Sorry. And you wanted to, if the score gets updated, you would like to know the updated score. So how can your web page keep getting a fresh score? Well, one thing you can do is you can keep reloading the page. That sends a message to the server that says refresh the page, and if they send you the latest score, you get the latest score. But now the question is there some way we could do that without having to hit a button? They could just send it to us. Well, there was a kludgy way to do this before HTML5, where you'd have an event-driven JavaScript running, and after a certain amount of time, it would send a message to the server saying, you know, hey, can I get a fresh score? Well, maybe the score hasn't changed. So you're sending out messages to them, and they're coming back with no new data. What would have been nicer would be if the server had new data to send, and then it knows, hey, I got new data, and I know you want it, and just send it at that time. So that's what server-sent events are. So you can register a server-sent event in your JavaScript code. You could say I have a variable called source, I have a new event source, you know, and then I would say where on the server, so PHP is an indication that this is on the server, where on the server this event is, and then I register for the server. So I say on message, I'm going to call this function, and I want this event. So this event gets passed in as a parameter. And then I can put on my HTML page the data coming in from the server. Now, if the server has a new update that they feel is worth letting the client know about, they will send it, and it will be instantly updated. So really, this eliminates the idea of polling, going back to the server and say, hey, you got any new information for me? They say, no, I don't. You know, and then you come back again, hey, you got new information? No, I don't. So it'd be much better if the server says, if the server knows when they have the new information, they can just send that out to you. So now the idea is, what if the server's sending too much information, too many updates? I mean, maybe you don't mind. Maybe you don't mind that they're sending so many updates, but maybe you only care about, what's something you would only care about? Like, so instead of every time the score changes, they're going to send you a new message. Maybe you only care when the team who's winning changes. So what you could do is have the event come to your web page rather than update the inner HTML to actually see it on the screen. Instead of updating it in HTML, we could set a local variable to say, you know, say, what's your favorite football team around here? So Eagles or Giants? What? No? Anyone have a preferred team?
No.
No?
Not about American football, so.
Okay. I figure we're halfway between New York and Philadelphia, so we'd have a little both. But anyway.
Pick one and it's fine.
What's that?
Pick one and it's fine.
Okay. All right, so let's say the only thing you want to see updated is if the team who's winning changes. So if the score is the Eagles are winning, 17-3, and then now it's 17-10, well, maybe you don't care. Only when it changes you want to see something. So we could go out to the server, and then we could say, the server is going to keep telling us every time the score changes. But maybe we will have a local variable that says who's the team currently winning, and then when they tell us the new score, if it's the same team, then we don't have to do an update. We'll only do an update if the team who's winning changes. So this is where we can combine server-sent events with local storage. Okay. All right, good. So, yeah, so like I say, the cookies have been around a long time. You use them all the time. They're actually always very annoying pop-up windows. Every time you log into a website, this, do you want us to store what you just typed into a cookie will pop up. But now you can do it in local storage or session storage. So, it's a judgment thing.